Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
For context, I was 38 weeks pregnant with what my doctor kept calling a complicated pregnancy. My baby was in breech position, basically sitting cross-legged right on my cervix, though thankfully my placenta was fine and the baby was healthy, just small at under 6 pounds. This whole mess started about 11 years ago. I've been going to this obstetrics and gynecology doctor throughout my pregnancy, and everything had been relatively normal until that one appointment that changed everything. I arrived at her office after my usual hour-long commute, taking a bus, then the subway, and another bus. Not exactly the most comfortable journey when you're heavily pregnant, but you do what you have to do. During the examination, she discovered I was already 4 centimeters dilated and my cervix was about 50% effaced. Now, for those who don't know, they usually keep you at the hospital once you hit 5 centimeters, so I was pretty close. Instead of taking immediate action, my doctor just stood there, scribbling in my file and mumbling to herself. Then she told me she didn't know what to do with me, wondering aloud whether to schedule me for a C-section or let me deliver naturally. When I responded that she should know since she was the doctor, she just dismissed my concern by saying it wasn't that simple and my case was complicated. She didn't even give me a clear answer, just sent me on my merry way, heavily pregnant and significantly dilated, to make that same hour-long journey back home using public transportation. No concerns about my safety, no consideration that I might go into labor during the trip. Nothing. The next day, around 11:15 in the morning, my water broke while I was at home. I immediately called for an ambulance, and while en route, I called the hospital to let them know I was coming. And guess who was on duty until 3 p.m.? You got it. My doctor. When I arrived, they rushed me in for a sonogram to check the baby's position. The technician was doing their thing, and my doctor was there, acting like the previous day never happened. While they're looking at the screen, I couldn't help myself. I asked her sarcastically if she finally knew what she was going to do with me today. She just finished looking at the sonogram, and without saying a word, she turned around and walked out of the room. Just straight up left. No explanation, no handover, nothing. Thankfully, her colleague took over, a much more competent doctor who actually knew what they were doing. They delivered my baby naturally, no C-section needed. All that drama and uncertainty my original doctor created was completely unnecessary. Later, I found out from one of the nurses that my original doctor had a habit of pushing for C-sections with even slightly complicated pregnancies, because they were more convenient to schedule. The nurse explained that the doctor disliked unpredictable natural deliveries because they messed up her schedule. When I asked if she was really going to give me major surgery just for her convenience, the nurse confirmed that this wouldn't have been the first time and that I wasn't the only patient who'd had issues with her. The nurse also mentioned that several complaints had been filed against her for similar situations. Apparently, she had a pattern of making patients feel uncertain and anxious about their deliveries, then pushing for C-sections even when they weren't necessary. I filed a formal complaint with the hospital about her behavior, especially about sending me home in an advanced stage of labor with such a long commute. The hospital administration called me for a meeting where they assured me they took these matters very seriously and acknowledged that my experience was unacceptable. I told them I hoped so, because no other woman should have to go through this. 2 months later, I received a letter informing me that she was no longer practicing at that hospital. I later learned that my complaint wasn't the only reason, but it was the final straw that led to her departure. I'm still amazed at how a medical professional could be so cavalier with both my and my baby's health. But I'm grateful that her colleague stepped in and helped me deliver my baby safely, and I'm even more grateful that by speaking up I might have prevented other women from going through the same experience with her. You see, I'm a freelancer who had been working from home even before the pandemic hit. My house was my sanctuary, a modest 3-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood that I'd inherited from my grandmother. She'd lived there for 40 years before passing away, and I'd spent the last 5 years making it my own. But everything changed when my wife got that dream job offer in Seattle. The position came with a significant pay raise and amazing benefits, the kind of opportunity you just can't pass up. So we decided to put our house on the market. That's when the nightmare with our next door neighbors began. These neighbors had moved in about 2 years ago. The husband was some kind of mid-level manager, and his wife, well, let's just say she was the epitome of entitlement. From day one, they've been difficult, complaining about my hedge being an inch too tall or calling the homeowners association because my trash bins stayed out 10 minutes past the collection time. The day after we put up the for sale sign, things got weird. The first potential buyers were a young couple with 2 kids. They seemed really interested until they noticed the massive pentagram drawn in what looked like red paint on our neighbor's driveway. The symbol was positioned so anyone viewing our house couldn't miss it. When I pointed out the neighbor's strange behavior to my wife, she suggested it might just be their kids playing with chalk. I had to remind her that they didn't even have kids, and that was definitely not chalk. The next day, the pentagram was gone, but there were 3 dead chickens arranged in a triangle in their front yard. I'm not kidding. I went over to confront them about the dead animals in their yard. Karen smugly claimed they were just practicing their religious freedom. Her husband backed her up, insisting they had every right to express their beliefs on their property. When I pointed out that this had all started right after we put our house up for sale, Karen played dumb. Then she had the nerve to suggest that if we were having trouble selling, they might be interested in buying at 30% below market value. That's when it clicked. These people were trying to scare away buyers to force us to sell to them at a discount. Their little scheme continued for weeks. Every time we had a showing scheduled, they'd pull something new. Sometimes it was loud death metal music blasting from their yard. Other times it was them standing outside in black robes, chanting gibberish. They even hung animal bones from their trees. But their plan backfired spectacularly. See, my grandmother hadn't just left me the house. She'd also left me a significant amount of money that I've been saving for emergencies. This qualified as an emergency in my book. First, I hired the best real estate lawyer in town. Then, I installed high-definition security cameras covering every angle of my property and theirs. Next, I contacted every relevant authority, the police, the homeowners association, the health department, and animal control. The evidence was damning. The cameras caught them setting up their little displays at night, buying the dead animals from a local butcher shop, illegal disposal of animal remains by the way, and even trying to trespass on my property to sabotage the exterior lighting before showings. But my masterstroke was going to the local media. A reporter was very interested in the story of the suburban Satanists trying to run a real estate scam. The day the story aired, things got even better. When the reporter asked Karen about their religious displays, she stammered out a weak excuse about expressing their beliefs. The reporter then revealed they had footage of her purchasing animals from the local butcher shop, where the owner had confirmed she specifically asked for dead animals to make our house unsellable. The husband's company saw the news report. Turns out they weren't too keen on having an executive who was caught on camera participating in real estate fraud and illegal animal disposal. He was suspended pending investigation. The Homeowners Association hit them with multiple violations and heavy fines. Animal Control and the Health Department issued citations. The police started investigating them for harassment and attempted fraud. Within 2 weeks, they had their own for sale sign up. They couldn't leave fast enough, but the karma train wasn't finished yet. Because of all the publicity and their desperate need to sell quickly, they had to accept an offer well below their house's market value. The story actually helped sell my house. A true crime podcast producer bought it for above asking price, saying the house's history would make for great content. We even made the local paper, where I told the reporter I was just glad justice was served, and how ironic it was that their plan to force me to sell cheap led to them having to sell their own house at a loss. They had to move in with Karen's parents in another state because no one in town would rent to them after the story went viral. As for me and my wife, we're loving Seattle. Though I have to admit, house hunting is a lot less exciting here. I've been working at this antiques mall for about 3 years now. It's usually a pretty chill job. I manage the front desk, help customers find what they're looking for, and make sure everything runs smoothly. Most of our dealers are wonderful people who've been with us for years, and they trust me to keep an eye on their booths while they're away. One of our most dedicated dealers, who's been renting space here for over a decade, came to my desk yesterday looking really worried. She suffers from severe arthritis, which makes it hard for her to move around sometimes, but she still comes in regularly to maintain her booth. She's one of those dealers who takes real pride in her displays and always keeps everything perfectly arranged. I asked if everything was okay since she looked concerned. She apologetically explained that she was looking for her glasses, which she must have put down while arranging items. She mentioned feeling foolish since she had just gotten them and they were quite expensive. I told her I hadn't seen any turned in but promised to keep an eye out and let her know right away if someone brought them to the desk. The dealer thanked me and went out to check her car, though she didn't seem very hopeful. When she came back in, she just shook her head and told me there was no luck finding them in her car. Just then, another one of our regular dealers, who was restocking her booth, overheard our conversation. She excitedly mentioned that she might know where the glasses were, explaining that she had overheard some shoppers talking about finding a pair of glasses, and she thought they were still in the store. The first dealer's face lit up with hope, and the second dealer went off to look for the shoppers she'd seen. About 10 minutes later, she came back with the glasses in hand. She told us what happened when she found the shoppers. The second dealer explained how she had approached them and asked if they had found a pair of glasses. Karen hesitated before denying it unconvincingly. When the second dealer insisted she had heard them talking about finding glasses earlier, Karen became visibly uncomfortable and started looking at her friend, who was looking increasingly embarrassed. Karen's friend urged her to return the glasses, pointing out that Karen knew they weren't hers. Karen got defensive, trying to argue that abandoned property was fair game, citing finders keepers. The second dealer corrected her, explaining that the owner was still in the store looking for them and had just gotten these expensive glasses. Karen's face turned red as she argued that the owner should have been more careful, suggesting this would teach them a lesson about being responsible with their things. By this point, other customers were starting to stare at the scene unfolding. One elderly gentleman who was browsing nearby stepped in. He told Karen that what she was doing was theft, plain and simple, pointing out that she knew the glasses belonged to someone else when she put them in her purse instead of turning them in. Karen's friend tried to defuse the situation, tugging at Karen's sleeve and begging her to just return the glasses, calling the situation ridiculous. Eventually, Karen finally reached into her purse and pulled out the glasses, practically throwing them at the second dealer. She demanded to speak to the manager about how she was being treated. I walked over, having heard the commotion, and told her that I was the manager on duty and had witnessed the entire interaction. I pointed out that our security cameras had recorded her admitting to knowingly keeping someone else's property and asked if she'd like me to call the police to file a report. Karen's face went from red to white in seconds. Without another word, she grabbed her friend's arm and practically ran out of the store, leaving behind a shopping basket full of items she'd been planning to buy. The first dealer was so grateful to have her glasses back, she started tearing up. She offered to buy lunch for the second dealer who'd helped her, but the second dealer just waved it off, saying she was just happy to help. We ended up banning Karen from the store. I took a picture from our security footage and added it to our do not allow entry board in the back office. The elderly gentleman who'd stepped in came up to the desk later while checking out with some vintage books. He shared that he'd been coming here for years, and this was why, because we look out for each other. He noted how rare that was these days. He wasn't wrong. In a world where it seems like entitled people are everywhere, it's nice to know there are still places where people stand up for what's right, even when it's just about a pair of glasses. I watched my mother build her mobile hairdressing business from scratch. She had such a caring heart, especially for elderly clients who couldn't make it to regular salons. Her business thrived for years until breast cancer struck 20 years ago. She fought it bravely with chemotherapy and radiation therapy, and we celebrated when she was declared cancer-free. Life went on wonderfully for 15 years. Her elderly clients adored her, and she treated them like family. She'd often come home with stories about their lives, their grandchildren, and their weekly adventures. But then the unthinkable happened. The cancer returned, more aggressive this time, spreading to her lungs. The news devastated us, but my mother remained strong. As her primary caregiver, I took on the responsibility of informing all her clients about the situation. Most of them were incredibly understanding and supportive. I called everyone on her client list, leaving voicemails where necessary. There was this one client who didn't answer her phone. Following protocol, I called her daughter's mobile and left a detailed message explaining the situation. I even sent a follow-up text to ensure the message got through. We didn't hear back from them, which was fine. We assumed they'd found another hairdresser. A month passed while I focused on caring for my mother. The treatments were harsh, but we tried to maintain our spirits. That's when the daughter called. I answered with a simple greeting, only to be met with immediate hostility. The daughter started screaming about how we were neglecting her mother. When I expressed confusion about who was calling, she became even more enraged, accusing me of playing dumb and threatening to call the police for elder abuse. I tried to interject and understand the situation, but she continued her tirade, calling us horrible people and accusing us of abandoning elderly clients. She hurled insults and accusations one after another. Once I finally realized who she was, I let her vent until she ran out of steam. Then, with an eerily calm voice, I explained that I was sorry she had missed our call and text message last month. I told her that my mother could no longer wash her mother's hair weekly because she was dying of lung cancer. I suggested that if she couldn't be bothered to help her own mother, she should find someone who wasn't constantly coughing, vomiting from medications, or suffering from 12 tumors throughout their body. The line went completely silent. The daughter managed to stammer out a brief apology before abruptly hanging up. When I turned around, I saw my mother trying desperately not to laugh. Despite the pain and discomfort from her treatment, her eyes sparkled with amusement. She gave me a weak high five and proclaimed proudly that I was her kid, and nobody messes with us. Later that evening, we received a lengthy, apologetic email from the daughter along with a generous donation to our local cancer support group. She'd also arranged for a professional hairdresser to visit her mother weekly, finally taking responsibility for her mother's care instead of relying on others. My mother's condition has stabilized since then. The treatments are still ongoing, but they're not as intense as before. We still laugh about that phone call sometimes, or as my mother calls it, our tumor humor moment. It's become one of those stories that reminds us how even in our darkest moments, we can find something to smile about. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.